As I said, my name is Bruce Johnson. I am, I guess I've got a whole bunch of titles, but mostly I'm just a computer consultant. I go around and I help people. People call me a lot of things, is really what I'm trying to say. I'm going to be talking a little bit about ASP.NET v.Next. This was, if you've been paying attention to Microsoft channels, just the various things coming out of Microsoft over the last little while, you might very well have heard about some of this beforehand. It really kind of made a big splash at an online virtual conference that Microsoft had a little over a month ago called Connect. Is when it really kind of hit a lot of people's consciousness, because if you're not actually paying attention to stuff on a regular basis, it would have just kind of slid by. Ultimately, what the ASP.NET v.Next is, it's also, they're still working through the branding for this. It's either ASP.NET 5 and MVC 6, because it's really important that you have the numbers not sync up. It's basically kind of those two things. They have more or less completely rethought ASP.NET from the ground up. They have a cutesy way of saying it, which is they've moved your cheese, but the cheese still tastes good. Okay. Mostly, yes, I know. Mostly, you're going to find they've moved your cheese a lot. Okay. This is, and it's kind of so. And there's kind of a weird combination of things going on here. It kind of goes like as follows. Most of what you know about ASP.NET and creating applications in that area isn't going to change, right? Controllers, models, MVC, all of the stuff related to that, exactly the same. Web forms, eventually when it catches up to the model I'm going to talk about, will be more or less exactly the same. You're doing web API stuff, you're creating REST APIs. The coding of what you're doing isn't going to change, okay? So, to a certain extent, if you kind of go through life not really paying much attention to what goes on under the covers, behind the scenes, the pipeline that goes along with ASP.NET, you're not going to notice the difference. They've actually done a pretty good job of keeping that stuff together. However, if you are taking ASP.NET a little bit further, if you're writing HTTP modules or handlers for it, things about how you actually gather resource, how you actually add references to your project. Things that you can do with respect to deployment. There are changes that are significant when you're working with this new version of ASP.NET. It's not massive changes, it's not likely to keep you up at night, but you need to be at least aware of some of them, and how far deep down the hole you go. In other words, how much of your cheese moves very much depends on how deep you go into ASP.NET on a regular basis. Okay? That's kind of the way this sits. So, like I said, my first thing to make you feel better is most of what you're going to know about ASP.NET isn't going to change. Okay? It is the same as it was before. It's not significantly different. Controller, like I said, all the stuff you actually, from the UI kind of down, is fine. It's really the setup, the project level stuff that's actually where the big difference happens to come into play. So, I kind of start with this little motherhood statement that so MVC 5 is a framework for building, okay, and all that kind of crap. Okay? So, there is nothing in here, this is coming from Microsoft, there's nothing in here that is particularly useful. One of the things they also say is it's designed for the modern web. Okay? Which is sort of true-ish, but again, in and of itself, unless you happen to have, anybody have a nice, concise definition of what modern web is? Anybody? Exactly. So, from their perspective, modern web basically comes into the following categories. First of all, the presumption that they're making is that a large portion of the websites that are being developed now, that are being greenfielded, have to be able to support tablets and mobile. Now, that is it's probably, I haven't found that to be massively true in my own experience, but based on, Microsoft does a pretty good job of actually working through it, talking to the people who use the product, where they're deploying it, finding out exactly what their audience wants. They don't normally go off the deep end for no particular reason. They usually have got some basis for kind of making these kinds of statements. So, it's certainly true that that mobile is a massively expanding space. Tablet probably not so much, but certainly mobile. Generally speaking, if you're writing mobile apps, you've got two possibilities. One is a native application, one is a web-based application. There's enough people who don't have the resources to be able to create native applications running on, you know, iPhones and Android devices, that web is their choice. And so for that reason, I suspect you see a huge uptake in mobile, and they have designed, at least thought through, a large portion of what they're doing to support a really solid mobile experience. That also gets combined with the concept of responsive design. For those of you that don't know what a responsive design is, it's basically a mechanism by which the layout of your web page changes based on the size of the surface on which it's being rendered. Okay, that's kind of the nutshell. Basically what it means is you bring your screen down, your page gets completely readjusted and functionality appears and disappears. So they've done some work with respect to making that a little bit easier to work with and to design against. Probably the biggest thing you bump into is they have taken the position that the most popular client frameworks need to be first-class citizens in .NET, in Visual Studio. Okay? They utilize Grunt and Bower out of the box inside of your Visual Studio projects. They support Angular and Knockout down to the IntelliSense level. They use NuGet like nobody's business. Okay, NuGet is how things get deployed into your application, into your website. So they've started to basically say, you know, every popular thing out there, we're going to, actually everyone that has any kind of significant audience, we're going to make sure works within our world, and in fact, we're going to base our functionality on those things. Grunt and Bower are there, right? They're part of an ASP.NET MVC5 project, out of the box, okay? And you don't necessarily need to be, you know, experts in them to be able to use them, but you at least have to have a sense of what they're for. The third thing you kind of bump into in the modern web is what they call standards-based tooling. I'll be really honest with you, that means nothing to me in terms of, as a, you know, I've got Visual Studio. That's not a standard. Well, it is in the .NET world, but not in the rest of the development world. However, what they've started to do is integrate their tooling into the browser. You've started to see that with IE 10 that's coming out, that's on 8.1, which is to say, you can go into Internet Explorer on IE 10. You can make changes to your CSS file through the developer tools that are in the browser and automatically sync those back up to your source code, running in Visual Studio, running on the file system. That's done through the Web Essentials toolkit that's available for download. That kind of stuff is being baked into Visual Studio and installed on your platform as part of Visual Studio. So you have got the ability to wire things up, and that, by the way, is not just for for Internet Explorer. Chrome has the same functionality. I can go from Chrome, from my developer tools, and I can automatically sync things up. As I make changes through the developer tools to my CSS files, automatically the changes get funneled back down to my source code. As well, they take advantage of their new compiler model. They have something that's called a no-compile compilation, which is more or less, at the time you hit a page, it compiles in memory. No longer is there a bin directory required. Okay, there is a bin directory required. None of the stuff that you guys create actually gets compiled into it. It's compiled in memory, kept in memory, right? So in other words, the compiler is not going through your CSHTML files, generating, you know, the DLLs it needs to, putting them out onto the hard drive, onto the disk, so that it can read them back in and then operate with it. It's all done in memory. It ends up being a lot faster by doing it that way. It also means that you can do things like go in directly, make a change to your code, refresh, and you'll automatically see it. You don't have to compile anything to be able to make that work. So that's kind of, you know, my take on what modern is, but if you start to now go into what their marketing for the newest ASP.NET is,